We know that competition with China will shape America's security and prosperity for decades to come. That's a fact. The legislation on the floor purports to deal with this issue. It covers a huge range of topics from economics to education to foreign and defense policy. Earlier this week, I voted with the majority of senators to proceed to this important debate. But as members have noted, this bill did not come out of committee quite ready for prime time. It needs thorough floor consideration with a robust bipartisan amendment process. Today, we'll vote on a very important amendment that I'll be proud to support. Ranking Member Inhofe and Vice Chairman Shelby have legislation that will return the pivotal issue of our funding of our national defense to the center of the conversation about competing with China, and this is right where it belongs. All the soft power in the world will only benefit us as long as we have the hard power to back it up. We must maintain our military edge against China and Russia. Yet for all this talk about competing with China, the Biden administration's budget proposal seeks to cut defense spending after inflation. China's long-term military investments are paying dividends that really should alarm us. But Democrats want to pump the brakes on our own. Fewer resources for our own men and women in uniform, less defense innovation. What sense does that make? If there is truly broad bipartisan support for taking our competition with China more seriously, there ought to be big bipartisan support for the Inhofe-Shelby amendment later today. Now, in another matter, our nation's southern border is still in crisis. The Biden administration still won't admit it. Much of the media would prefer not to cover it. But the facts are clear, and they're unacceptable. A few days ago, Customs and Border Protection issued their report on the month of April. The number of encounters with illegal entrants was 3% higher in April than it was in March. The crisis is still growing. Encounters with single adults on the border were 613% higher last month versus April of last year, when the Trump administration put emergency measures in place. Encounters with unaccompanied children were up 2,217% year over year. So let me say that one more time. 2,217% more kids without parents at our border on President Biden's watch. The administration has tried to boast that the number of unaccompanied kids in the custody of the Department of Homeland Security has gone down. It has, because they've transferred large numbers of kids from DHS to HHS. There are now more than 19,000 children in the custody of Health and Human Services, and hundreds more arriving every single day. We know why all this is happening. When Washington Democrats spent years reciting the mantra, abolish ICE, people listened. When our new president spent his campaign signaling he'd support a weaker border, when he expressed that he supports providing government health care to people here illegally, people actually took note. Now Democrats cannot get control of the crisis that they have stoked. The vice president, supposedly the point person to fix illegal immigration, has yet to even visit the southern border. Apparently, Secretary Becerra's operation at HHS has, in some instances, left migrant children stranded on buses for multiple days. Exactly the kind of unacceptable mismanagement that Senate Republicans fear we might see under an HHS secretary without relevant health care or management experience. Last week, HHS announced it would be taking money that was meant to replenish the strategic national stockpile, money to fight this pandemic and future pandemics, to help with the migrant crisis. Well, today, the Senate will consider another amendment from the senior senator from Wisconsin. It would stop the Biden administration from canceling contracts that are already in place to build a wall on our southern border. Perhaps our Democratic colleagues will help us begin to address the border crisis this administration has caused. Now, Mr. President, on a completely different matter, as Democrats have pushed their massive political takeover bill, S1, Americans' First Amendment rights and privacy rights have been thrust into center stage. The legislation contains multiple elements that would chill Americans' exercise of free speech and let Washington bureaucrats hoard more of citizens' private information without good cause. We know exactly how this can go wrong. Remember President Obama's IRS scandal. Unelected bureaucrats treated organizations differently, subjected Americans to unequal scrutiny depending on their beliefs. Nonprofits with a whiff, just a whiff, of conservative beliefs were slow-walked and singled out for unfair treatment. Or think back to 2014. The Obama administration had to reach a settlement after a government worker leaked confidential information about a conservative group in violation of federal law. Unsurprisingly, those private details found their way to a liberal group that had plenty of ideas about what to do with it. Courts have found that the state of California has repeatedly leaked or inappropriately released confidential information about nonprofits' donors. Last year, remembering all these incidents, the Treasury Department finalized action on a basic common sense principle. If there's no legitimate reason for the IRS to have certain information, then the IRS shouldn't collect it. Makes sense. The prior administration had the IRS stop blanket collection of non-public information about citizens who make I repeat, non-tax deductible contributions to certain organizations. Contributions to 501c4 organizations are not tax deductible. The IRS doesn't need these details just for kicks and giggles. But now, Democrats' political takeover bills would roll back this step and open new fronts in the far-left war on privacy and free speech. S1 would narrow the protections of the First Amendment. It would empower the feds with new authority to track and police the speech of Americans. This is the same bill that would essentially make Washington Democrats the Board of Elections for every county and state in America. I guess somehow maybe that wasn't enough. Well, I've worked with my colleague from Indiana, Senator Braun, on legislation to nip one part of this nonsense right in the bud. Our bill would codify the rule issued by the last administration. Americans would remain free from a federal dragnet collecting private information that it neither needs nor uses for legitimate law enforcement purposes. Information that can be mishandled, or worse, used to target and harass Americans based on their views. So I'm proud to stand with Senator Braun and with 39 Republican co-sponsors and with citizens across America, across the political spectrum, who don't need the IRS peering into their First Amendment activities any more than is strictly necessary. I would certainly urge all of our colleagues to support our simple bill. Now, one final matter. My Senate office is losing a talented and dedicated young staffer this week. Fortunately, he's just been on loan from his home state, our home state, all along, and he's now heading back to the Bluegrass. Kevin Grout started with me 5 years ago. This bright, sharp, and cheerful young McConnell scholar from the University of Louisville began as a staff assistant in the mailroom, or you might say sort of my body man. But in this line of work, talent attracts responsibility. Before long, Kevin had graduated to serve as the speechwriter in my personal office. In 4.5 years, he's helped me craft more remarks, op-eds, and written statements than any of us could possibly count, almost all focused on issues that matter most to Kentuckians. We're sorry to lose Kevin's talents here on the team, but Kevin and his wife, Addie, are taking their careers and their young son, Henry, and putting down roots where it all began. Washington will be sorry to see them go, but it'll be Kentucky's good fortune to welcome them back.